Welcome, everyone, to the ICSS Sunday Morning Marxist Forum. My name is Alan Miller, and I'm a member of the program committee for ICSS Sunday morning sessions. We're based in Oakland, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area, USA. Our programs are online via Zoom Sunday mornings at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Time. You can sign up at our website, icssmarks.org. That's icssmarks.org to receive email announcements with a Zoom link for future Sunday sessions. You can also view videos of past presentations and send us a message using our contact form on our website. We want to call your attention to our donation page where you can make a donation to support our programs. Our speaker today is Professor Amit Singh, who teaches at the Indian Institute of Technology, IIT Bombay. Dr. Singh has a PhD in mechanics from the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, where he was involved in anti-war and labor organizing efforts in Minneapolis. Currently, he's involved in the struggles around working class, caste issues, and resistance to attacks on academic freedom and national minorities. Amit traveled in China, I believe it was last year or the year before, with his family, and will put forward observations, stories, and interesting encounters during his trip. He will also highlight contradictions in Chinese society, capital and state, and will focus on the present state of the Chinese economy, health, education, and other parameters. We'll start as usual with the presentation by our speaker, and after a short break for announcements, we'll have a discussion where you can express your views and ask questions. So welcome to Sunday Morning Marxist Forum, Professor Singh, Amit, and go ahead and share your screen and you can get started.
All right. So thank you for a very nice introduction, which I'm not worthy of actually. So don't call me Professor Singh. It sounds quite you are.
Okay,
Better to call,
Amit.
better to call comrade or Amit recently. So okay. So and my slides are visible, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So let's go and do the slideshow. All right. So first of all, it is my great pleasure to speak in front of all of you. I mean, I lived in the US for 10 years or 11 years. So it is my second home and in some degree my first home because I became from, a freshman to a graduate and postgraduate even in the US. So, the Lord Buddha would have said that I got enlightened in the US. So it is always a pleasure to speak to our US comrades. Uh, Therefore, I mean, so I visited China in 2024, actually, 1 year, almost 1.5 years ago. And I visited for a conference, but I stayed there for 15, 16 days. And I looked at different aspects of the society with my family members. I mean, my wife, Poonam, and my son, Arun. So all the photos that I'm going to show, they are clicked by them. So I special thanks to them. Uh, so let me just start with some of my, some of the map of China where I went. I didn't go to a lot of cities. I wanted to go to the villages also, but I did not have the chance. But I landed at Shanghai, and then I went to a very, modern city, Hangzhou, which is also an old city in the sense of the fact that Silk Route actually ends here. So Silk Route, where you start from Central Asia and it ends here at Hangzhou. And then I traveled to Beijing, and then from Beijing I traveled back to Shanghai. So it's a tale of three cities actually. So this is the, zoomed in map. So this is where I went, and I interacted with mostly students, teachers, and middle class professionals. Because of the language barrier, I wasn't able to speak a lot with workers, which I regret. I and did not talk to government representatives at all. So it would have been wonderful if some government officials would have shared their own views. So most of my observations and conclusions, therefore, will be debatable and should not be considered the final word. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of you have also visited China in recent years. So I will be happy to listen to your observations. So I'm just sharing my observations. This should not be taken as the final word. So this is the caution that I'm having, because China is a big country and 15 days is nothing actually. So with that word of caution, I will start my observations. So when I landed at the airport at Shanghai, the airport was very minimal. It is not extravagant. If you go to Singapore, or even if you go to India, some of the Indian airports, you will find a lot of duty-free zones and a lot of consumerism, which actually I did not find at Shanghai. And so, I mean, I was pretty happy about that. So my expectation was that I will see a city or a country which is transitioning, I mean, from the communist society to a little bit of socialist society to a little bit of consumerism, but not so much. And I was sort of surprisingly proven correct. I went to Pudong new area, which is a new industrial town, quite populated with working class people. And there again, I was very happy with my experiences and observations. People were very simple and nice, and I talked to a lot of people, even vegetables sellers, and it all looked good. Surprisingly, there were no police. I didn't find any police in Pudong new area, not even traffic police. Uh, so the first few days I started, downloading different apps, because the apps in India and the US, I mean, they don't work in China because of the censorship. Uh, and we were quite surprised to see how modern infrastructure, Chinese infrastructure has become. But then we went from Pudong new area to the downtown, and then everything changed. We found foreign brands everywhere in the downtown and in the whole Shanghai region that we traveled around. Plenty of malls. I mean, the number of malls in one city probably would beat the number of malls existing in India. Very high fashion restaurants, expensive restaurants. The working class condition was exactly almost the same as I find in India. I mean, people just leave their plates, and then some workers come and then clean the plates, etc. So it's all there. And it just showed to me that the commodity fetishism, which Marx talks about, and which is the key to understand capitalism. So commodity fetishism simply means that, I mean, all of us do concrete labor, but when we go to the market and we exchange our commodities, then we equate our labor. And in the process of that equating the labor becomes abstract. And then once the labor becomes abstract, then we do not care how that particular commodity has been made. So, this is quite visible in China. In Shanghai, we were basically seeing the same kind of capitalist ills that we see in India or in the US. That if you buy something, you don't know where it is coming from. What are the working conditions? What were the labor conditions under which the commodity was produced? So this consumerist culture and commodity fetishism was the first shock. And surprisingly, we did not find many bookstores. In fact, in our whole 15 days travel, we did not find a single person reading the book. They might be reading some books on mobile phones, but hard copies, we did not find anything. In fact, we didn't find any bookstores also. But we were told later on that there are some bookstores, but they are heavily controlled by the state. Colleagues also suggested to us that people actually avoid talking about politics. We felt the same everywhere. This was also confirmed by the behavior of my Chinese colleagues in the US universities. So one of the reasons why is it so? So Xin Ran is an author of China Witness: Voice from a Silent Generation. And she quotes Professor Gao Mingxuan, who is an authority on Chinese penal code. So according to Professor Gao Mingxuan, he says that the concept of guilt by association was very important in ancient Chinese law as early as the second millennium BC. So when a criminal was found, the whole family was punished as harshly as the criminal himself. We find that in Indian villages also, the oppressed caste, if they used to do some offense, the whole caste family used to be punished. So it is not only Chinese experience or with regard to the feudalism. In fact, many Asian societies actually face a similar kind of problem. And we know that even in India, the oppressed castes are not very vocal. But in China, we know that right from the ancient societies, there is a centralized state system. And Professor Gao Mingxuan believes that that is the reason why people avoid talking about politics. So that is one of the explanations, although I'm not very sure whether that is the real explanation. But just look at the infrastructure which we found in different Chinese cities, much, much better than even the US infrastructure. I have lived a long part of my whole 10, 12 year of life in Minneapolis and Chicago. And the crumbling infrastructure that I was able to see in Minneapolis and Chicago, it was quite opposite that China is quite modern. I mean, the roads, the kind of the railway network, the kind of even airport infrastructure, much, much better than even the US infrastructure. This is some of the visuals that you can see. Infrastructure is absolutely phenomenal. And comparing to Indian infrastructure, it's like going to a different planet altogether. The Chinese railway stations are so huge that it can accommodate like maybe 50,000 to 100,000 people at the same time. So all of this is quite remarkable and quite good. This is one of the videos that I took. Okay, so however, I must say that many of the infrastructure seems to be quite taken a copy from US infrastructure or even European infrastructure. So it is like when Marx says that the advanced society shows the image to the less advanced society, it is quite true in China. So in the US, in New York, you have Times Square. So there is a People's Square in Shanghai. It's very similar to Times Square. I mean, the way they have tried to build it, the imitation is quite palpable. And yet, Chinese infrastructure is really superb. And the kind of, they have been able to preserve some of their religious artifacts, such as temples, etc. However, I mean, look at one particular temple here, which is in Jingshan Temple, and look at the background of that temple. So you have this architecture, beautiful temple, but just in the background, you have all these high-rise buildings and offices and restaurants, etc. This basically made the whole thing quite ugly. Now, we interpreted that this is one way of saying Chinese state saying to the religious guys that you have to you can't go beyond the state and you can't go beyond the state development, which is not very similar, which is exactly opposite to what we have sometimes in India. So look at some Indian temple here. In the background, you don't find much of these big buildings. So that shows you the kind of status that society, actually the state gives to religious architectures. We had an opportunity to go to Shanghai History Museum. So it is a big national museum. And we were expecting that it will show us a lot of, the class struggle that happened during Mao's period, during the anti-colonial period in China. But we did not find much. What we found was rather a very nationalist kind of, museum. It showed how China was semi-colonized. It showed the birth of Communist Party, the anti-imperialist history. Uh, it showed how working class was depicted during 1920 to 49, but mostly in the sense of fighting Japanese, Kuomintang, and imperialist forces. So there was a small section where the peasants were fighting against the landlord, but that was very small in comparison to the huge 3 or 4 storied building. So this is one of the cartoons that we liked very much in that museum, which shows the anti-imperialist nature of the Chinese Revolution. So you have the Hitler, on top of Hitler, you have this guy Churchill, and then a Chinese man, doing something. The museum actually also venerated a lot of business people. So how the local business developed the whole society, there is a huge section on that. Nothing much you will find on Mao, except for few group photos, couple of them, not much. Everywhere in China, the image of Mao has been suppressed. Although in general public, you will find people quoting Mao all the time, but the state basically makes sure that the images of Mao are not seen everywhere. In this museum, there was a section, however, on some military leaders, such as Chen Yi, who was not very significant. But yet, there were sections on those leaders, but not on Mao or other radical leaders. We didn't find anything on cultural revolution. Okay. In fact, in all 3 cities, we did not hear much about cultural revolution. We did not find much about cultural revolution. So the history of cultural revolution is a history of amnesia, I would say. I mean, the state asks people to forget that experience actually. So this I have already mentioned that we did not find much bookstores. Later on, when I started looking at it, many bookstores are getting closed if they don't follow the party lines. Although the number of books published per year in China is quite huge, it's humongous. It's 200,000 to 400,000 as per some estimates. So there is a particular table that I have put in over here. So it shows that in the US in 2013, the number of books published was around 275,000, whereas in China it is something like 208,000. So it's a huge number of books that are getting published. So what explains this behavior? Okay. So one of the reasons which I think is that the literacy rate in China is quite high. It's like 97% literacy rate, whereas in the US and India, the literacy rate is close to 80%. In fact, there are 40 million people in the US who can't read properly, which is shocking actually. The US is ranked currently 36th in the literacy among all nations. If you look at the number of higher educational institutions in China, it's quite huge. Actually, it's like 3,000 universities we have in China in 2021 data. According to 2021 data, we have around 3,000 universities. In comparison to that, in the US, we find that there are like roughly around 6,000 universities. So the universities in US is also huge. It's not like that, I mean, they are insignificant. And yet you have 40 million people in the US who can't read properly. India lags quite behind. It has only 1,000 universities in comparison to Chinese 3,000 universities. So that explains that literacy rate is high. Now, why people don't read books in the cities? Maybe they're reading more in the rural areas, or they're reading more on the mobile phones, or they are not reading in public, but they are reading in private. So these are some of the explanations which I can think of. Or perhaps maybe in the discussion section, more people can comment on it. Or perhaps, what happens is that people are publishing these books, but these books are mostly, the pulp fiction kind of books, or, the books which are not asking questions to the state and the power. So those are some of the observations which I can think about Chinese publications. If you look at the state expenditure on education, Chinese state expenditure is touching quite close to the expenditure that is happening in the US. In the US, we have roughly $1 trillion expenditure, state expenditure. Now, China is also spending around $900 billion. So it has gone huge. However, the privatization of education is happening in China. It is actually increasing in China. If you look at the number of student enrollment in private schools, it has increased up to around 20%. It is roughly around 10 to 15% in the US and around 50% in India, in urban India. Overall, 33% education in India is private. So privatization is increasing in China, but the rate is not so high as it is in India. But yet we can simply say that the trend is towards more privatization. So I will share one experience of mine when I was going from Shanghai to Hangzhou. So Shanghai to Hangzhou is around 200 kilometers. It is like you ride a bullet train, it will take you there in 1 hour. Okay. So what happened was that we took the ticket, but the train was overcrowded and we didn't get the seat. So what was happening was that we had some luggage, and we tried to put the luggage on the on the shelf, which is on top of the rack, underneath the people were sitting. So while I was keeping the luggage over there, my bag started to fall, and it barely hit a person's head, a woman's head who must be perhaps in early 30s. Now, the minute it started, I mean, it barely hit her. The whole, the whole compartment made a sigh. I mean, a sound, a very peculiar sound, and which further made us very, very, very embarrassing. So that moment was very embarrassing. So the after that event, basically we told the woman that, look, whatever happens to you, I mean, all the expenses will be incurred by us, so don't worry about that. So if you need any medical help, I mean, we will help you. And then when all of this was happening, the ticket collectors, railway police, who all are rolled into one, they all came to us, and they started talking to us. Of course, I mean, we can't understand the fluent Chinese, and they can't understand the fluent English, so we have to rely on some translation apps. And so what happened was that our whole 1 hour just passed into this dealing with this crisis. When both of us, like the victim and us, we actually disembarked from the train. Then she was taken to the hospital, and the CT scan, it cost her around 300 yuan, which is roughly around $40. But the same CT, and that CT scan she did in the public hospital. In the public hospital, she was undergoing through the CT scan, and the public hospital charged her around $40. In comparison, in India, the same kind of public hospital is charging us only $10. So this basically explains that even health is getting privatized in China. More and more out-of-pocket expenditure is being incurred, is being borne by Chinese citizens. Because had it been happening in, let's say, in India, I'm pretty sure the Indian people wouldn't have taken a fellow traveler to the police or to the hospital. But this small episode has suggested to me that young people over there are really worried about their economic security. And if anything bad happens to them, something like an accident, then they're very afraid. And that's why they were afraid of this whole accident and wanted me to pay the entire cost, which anyway I did later on. So continue to talking about health. If you look at some of the data, Chinese state is spending around 5 to 7% of GDP on the health, whereas in India, both public and private, it is only 4%. I think in the US also it is around 5 to 7%. In China, we learned later on that public health insurance system is quite extensive. In Beijing, we saw through our naked eyes that there are neighborhood-based healthcare stalls. So if you want to measure your blood pressure or general OPD, it is totally free in the neighborhood area. But of course, if something happens to you, like CT scan or other kinds of things, then you have to pay out of your pocket. But yet, I mean, the health infrastructure is better than that we have in India. And but here also, my observation is the same, that privatization is increasing, which is visible in the data. Also, the number of private hospitals is increasing, the number of private beds is increasing. So, some of the data I have shown in the below. So after the talk, you can go and take a look at the data more properly. But that is the case in China. In comparison, US, you can see that it has the most expensive healthcare in the world. So this is one particular statistics that I tried to pull out, and it just shows that the per capita health expenditure in selected countries, and US is really at the top. I mean, it beats Germany by almost like double. So, 7,000 to almost like 12,000, 13,000, 14,000. So now I would like to talk something about the surveillance, the kind of surveillance society that we saw in China. So everywhere that we went to, I mean, we found a lot of CCTV cameras. This, which is increasingly we are seeing in all cities, not in China, but even in the US, even in India. And it was very difficult to enter Tiananmen Square and Mao Mausoleum, etc. There was a long queue, and we felt that as if Chinese state doesn't want a lot of people to hang around that area. It was like the area was quite cordoned off, and even though it was highly touristic and people were waiting in the queue, there were clear signs that the police didn't want, a lot of people to go in a single go. So some people were actually waiting for even 2-3 days just to enter to the region and visit Tiananmen Square and Mao Mausoleum. We found, as I said earlier, that camera everywhere, which people told us that it has increased after COVID. And whenever police checked us, we got checked at multiple points, multiple times. They took photo of our passports also. In fact, during my conference, when I was, speaking, and when I was attending this scientific conference, which has nothing to do with the state policy, and yet, before every conference room, we had a police person on, which is quite surprising. I mean, we don't see it elsewhere, but police later on we found, even people told us that they are all everywhere in plain clothes also. So you don't even realize that, that you are being watched, and yet police is watching you. So all of this has definitely impacted Chinese society. But in terms of technology, China also controls a lot of, it uses a lot of firewall to censor internet. But the one positive thing is that it has become almost self-reliant on technology. Some of the technology that we use, for example, WhatsApp, they have their own version. For car riding apps, etc., they have their own version. It is not as smart as, I would say, Uber, but they have their own version, and it works quite well. So if, let's say, something happens in the geopolitical affairs, and United States or European countries simply say that, this app is not going to work in China or in any other country, India will face a lot of problem if tomorrow the US takes such kind of stand. But in China, the life will go as usual, as smoothly as usual. So it's quite positive that because of this censorship and firewall, etc., they are building their own technology. So they're becoming more self-reliant, and that's a positive thing. So privatization, I have already talked about the privatization of education and health. This is the privatization of the industry sector, the retail sector, etc. So there's a data that in 2012, the private enterprises accounted for more than 70% of all firms. So in a way, right now, almost like only 20% of the firms are state controlled. Most of the firms in China have become privatized. By 2010, the registered private firms actually soared from 14,000 around 2000 to roughly around 300,000 by 2010. Okay. In the retail sector, I mean, the data is that around 80 to 90% right now, the retailers are private. The state retailers usually constitute only roughly around 3.5%, and in sales only around 22%. So it is, we see a clear pattern that the economy wise, China has become more private than the state oriented. But there are some contradictions. I will present some data later on. Now, this is also a very startling statistic that the employment share of the state-owned enterprises, it has fallen down to now almost like 15%. So 18% in 2011, and the latest data is something like 15%. And Chinese state-owned firms, they only account for 8 to 10% of exports. So most of the exports right now are happening because of the private firms. So the state-owned firms have lost a lot of employment. They are quite big, many of the state-owned firms, but their share in the export market is only 8 to 10%. Okay. So you can see this particular data that I'm showing to you, that China has the highest number of state-owned enterprises in the top 100 largest enterprise, the share of the state-owned enterprise. So the state-owned enterprise has become big, in the sense of monopoly, and but overall their significance in the economy has gone down significantly. This is a data shared by an economist, Dick Low, in Source London, and which I found interesting actually. So this is like how the GDP itself is growing in China nowadays. So you can see from the data that till 2009 and 10, till the great financial crisis, you can say with plus minus 2-3 years, the GDP growth rate was almost more than 8%, 9%, 10% in the whole 2000 decade. Okay. And then it has suddenly declined. In fact, after right now, the GDP growth rate is something in the order of 4 to 5%. So this is quite remarkable that the whole decade of 2010s, the GDP growth rate is below 8%, 7%. And recent periods after COVID, actually, it has increased a little bit, but still hovering around 4 to 5%. So the old GDP growth rate that we used to associate with China is more or less, it seems to be over. I mean, China is not growing at 8% or 9% now. It is typically growing at 4%, 5%. In fact, US is growing right now at 2-3%. So it's not far, actually, 4-5%. And so Chinese economy is not doing good after 2010. This is also a graph which shows what is the rate of profit in China. Okay, again by the same researcher, Dick Low. So in this particular picture, we can see that the rate of profit in China has also declined significantly after the COVID crisis, after the great financial crisis. And so there are two figures over here. The black lines, it is showing the aggregate rate of profit, meaning industry, finance, etc., everything combined together. Whereas this gray line, that is showing industrial rate of profit. Okay, so the industrial rate of profit is still high. Industrial rate of profit is still hovering around 16%. Whereas if you look at the aggregate rate of profit, which includes finance also, it has gone down to 8%. So roughly around like a difference of half. So this means that the finance sector is really bringing things down. So productivity is there in the industrial sector, but the financial market, the capital control that Chinese state does, it is highly inefficient and highly, I would say, it is basically, it is under debt, and because of a lot of issues, it is not giving as much profit as the industrial sector. And in fact, it is basically putting up a halt on further investment. So this is a source of concern for the Chinese state and economy. What are they going to do with the financial market? Are they going to further open it? There is huge pressure on them to open it and integrate with the world financial markets. Right now, Chinese financial market is still mostly under the state control. In fact, Chinese stock market is highly regulated, highly under state control. But because of this, I think there is huge pressure on those markets to get opened. So probably, I mean, the Trump administration really wants to, do a trade deal where they would have this kind of negotiation happening. But yeah, and you can see that also in the capital formation. And so this is like gross fixed capital formation, which shows how much capital is getting invested in the economy. So again, this also shows the similar trend that after 2010, the capital formation has also declined. It has declined in all the countries, but in the US, it has a little bit increased. In China, it has declined. Consistently, it has declined. However, I mean, we can talk about the manufacturing, and manufacturing, everybody knows that China is the king nowadays. So Chinese manufacturing share in the whole world output is right now almost 1/3. Okay. But people say that US has declined. It has declined, but if you look at the data from 2008 onward, I mean, they have kind of arrested the decline. I mean, the decline is not secular in nature. The decline is there. Definitely there is decline, but still US is the second largest, manufacturing power in the world. So, so that has repercussion on our debate around, whether there is rivalry between China and the US or not, which I will touch upon a little bit. But one thing is quite clear. So Chinese productivity is increasing, at least the industrial productivity I'm talking about. But at the same time, because of the several reasons, Chinese real wages have increased, and it is still increasing. Okay, so Chinese real wages are increasing. So the standard of living is increasing in China. People are getting better standard of living even right now, even in the neoliberal period. But definitely that has taken a hit after 2010 and 12. For example, this is a particular table which shows that the real GDP increased at 10.2% rate between 2000 to 2012, but after 2012, the GDP increase is only 6%, and the employment wise, it is even it has gone in negative actually. So I will show you some data on employment later on, that all things are not rosy. But definitely after 2010, Chinese economy has taken a hit. But during this hit, my claim is that the growth, real wages is still increasing. There is still increase in growth in the average annual salary, although that real wage growth has reduced right now after 2020, 2021, but still it is significant. In comparison to, let's say, countries like India, in India, the real wages in the last 10 years in the Modi period, it is almost stagnant. So this is almost the flat data I'm showing you about India. In the US, actually, the thing is that the real annual wages, if I just compare the US real wages with China, the 80s was a lost period where the real wages actually didn't grow. I mean, in fact, it contracted for many sections of the society. In fact, for the bottom society, it almost got contracted, but bottom 90%. But then it peaked a little bit, and in the last couple of years, actually, it has it has hovered around a little bit increase, but not as significant increase as we see in the Chinese economy. So this is the curve for the US real wages for different percentile income groups. And indeed, the top 1% has basically taken all the benefits. So that is clearly shown by the data. We were talking about unemployment in China. Youth unemployment in China is a huge concern. And we talked to several students there. The students do not get employment as they graduate. They have to wait. Many students live in one room is being shared by 5, 6 students. Students wait for the public employment because the wages are higher in the public sector. So they compete for the the public sector areas like railways and all, and they gave exams for that. This is similar as we see in India. So people keep appearing for these exams, and they remain unemployed for the overall period. So the youth unemployment rate is around 24%, no, 21% in 2023, and it has even increased after COVID. It increased. It is still very high, around 24-25%. Uh, so uh, so basically, there is some data that around 3.7 million people appeared for some peanut of jobs in the government sector. So this is some data which you can see later on. But the overall message is that this was also corroborated by my interviews with a lot of students and scholars, that youth unemployment is really, really very high. And when we talk about unemployment as well as the working condition is China is still very poor. I mean, it is still third world condition in many cities. Even in cities like Guangzhou, which is like a highly modern city right now, even there in some localities, you have the sweatshops where children don't have creche, they are working together. So the mom is working and the children do not have nearby creche system or daycare. They have to basically stay there till the mother works gets completed. Long hours of work, 10 hours of work, they are, they have to work. And per month salary is roughly not more than 3,000 yuan, which is roughly equivalent to something like, $300, $400. 475 weekly hours. And even in the corporate culture, we have this, 996 culture in China, which basically says that 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. So it's like, the Chinese capital demands long working hours from Chinese labor. And because of that, labor capital conflict is very severe. And that gets reflected in different forms. For example, in the US, we see mass shooting. In India, we see suicides, farmer suicides. In China, you see increasingly knife and stabbing attacks. So late September, just this is the data for September 2025, when a 37-year-old man killed 3 people and injured 15 others in basically in a Shanghai supermarket. In October 2025, a 50-year-old man injured 5 people. So roughly on the basis of twice, 2 months or 3 months, there is a major knife attack and a lot of people get killed. Okay. So this doesn't get, we don't get to read this much if you are not focusing upon Chinese news. But if you read any Chinese newspaper, these news are quite frequent. Between 2017 and 2021, the youth unemployment, the youth group that I was talking about earlier, the suicide rate has got doubled. Okay. And many of the people who are graduate, nowadays they are becoming drone operators. Okay. And this is some of this that we actually saw with our own eyes, that they have become drone operators, and drone operators, for delivery of things, for example, for food delivery, etc. Now they are using drones to take the food from one place to another. And the drone operators are like, B.Tech people nowadays. So this is the level of unemployment that we are talking in China.
Amit,
Uh,
we want to leave time for people to ask questions. So maybe about 10 more minutes or so. Would that be
sure,
okay?
sure.
Okay,
So
thank you.
I'll just try to wrap it up. So what does it
Okay.
say about the working class, strength in China? Is it like, posing some challenge to the capital? So Chinese, SCFTU, which is Chinese Federation Trade Union, is the only recognized trade union and which is largest in China. And China has roughly around 700 million workforce, which is equivalent to all the US, European Union, and Latin America combined. And they have 45% unionization rate, which is very high. So I think because of this unionization rate, which is very high, they have been able to, sustain the growth in the real wages. In comparison, in US, the unionization rate has declined a lot. Currently, it is hovering around 10%. In public sector, it is around 33%. And this is the data for the US. As you can see, I've just shown a picture which shows the union membership in the US, how it has declined. So compared to the US, of course, I mean, Chinese labor is more unionized. However, how much that union is doing political consciousness, that is very, I mean, that is debatable. So strikes, etc., happen, sit-in protests, etc., all those things happen, but they are managed quite easily. They are not allowed to escalate. And we talked to several students, they also said the same thing. Student politics is not at all allowed. In universities, a student cannot do any protest, they cannot do sit-in, they don't have any newspaper which can ask questions. Okay, so no politics, absolutely in the universities. Uh, in the so, but it doesn't mean that the working class is not striking. For example, in the food delivery gig economy, almost 150 strikes happened in 2000 between 2015 and 2021. And there are various other sources of disruption. For example, bankruptcy is quite common in Chinese firms. So when things get bankrupt, because of the huge number of workforce, hundreds of employees they become jobless. Okay, and so what do they do? So in sometimes the strikes are not organized, but they are desperate calls. So workers will simply climb onto some factory rooftop and they will say that I'm going to commit suicide. Okay. In some cases, in some cases they have some organized protest, but it doesn't last for more than 4 or 5 days. I mean, no, so it doesn't last for a number of days. So working class is showing spontaneous action. This is the conclusion, but political consciousness is not allowed to develop. Uh, Now I have this whole section on China, whether you can define it as imperialist or semi-periphery. But given the time, I think I will basically bring it into discussion. So I have some data with basically shows, but I will just show you the conclusion. Some data I have compiled, but I will show you the conclusion which I am making here. Uh, so my conclusion is that China is increasingly becoming more capitalist, and in fact, it is becoming even more imperialist, but imperialist vis-a-vis global south, in the sense of economic imperialism, in the sense of transfer of surplus value. So the military component of imperialism is not so much in China. Its power is still not significant vis-a-vis the US, European Union, Japan, Australia, and the US-led global empire. However, the Chinese capital is the same capital as we have elsewhere. And when we have this capital, I mean, the wars are inherent in this capital expansion and domination. I had some supporting data, but I'm just providing you the conclusion. But I mean, I didn't show you the data. I'll show you in the discussion. Chinese labor is not, is still highly revolutionary. It is not, there is no labor aristocracy in China. Labor has huge revolutionary potential. So the question is that can they take control of CPC in future one more time? So people in the US and elsewhere have to take note of all these contradictions. And of course, any war talk with China has to be discouraged by the whole working class of the world. And we have to finalize in China. We have to have more visits in China, more online collaboration, etc. And I showed in the data also, but US is still the dominant imperialist country. So the recent war that we are seeing on Palestine, is Iran and Venezuela. Many people are saying that this is an inter-imperialist war between China and Russia on one hand and the US-led global empire on the other. However, I beg to differ. I mean, these are purely hegemonic wars of the US to sustain its hegemonic role. Anyway, so with that, I will simply conclude. These are some of the food items that we ate in China. Wonderful. But I would love to have some discussion because I skipped one of the most important section, whether China, how do we characterize China, whether it is semi-periphery or imperialist, which I will do so in the discussion section. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit. Great presentation. What we're going to do now is move into the question and answer part of our program after a few quick announcements. Next week, we're all aware of the unfolding crisis in the Middle East and West Asia, and most immediately the danger of a catastrophic war posed by the unprecedented U.S. military buildup and threats being made against the Islamic Republic of Iran. We're trying to put together a program to talk about that. Things are changing so quickly. Next weekend might actually be a very critical time. So please check our website for updates and sign up for an email notification of future programs at icssmarks.org. That's icssmarks.org. Okay, so we're going to start the Q&A part of our program, question and answers. And what I'd like you to do is, I want to remind you is that you can, I'm sorry, that this is a comradely forum for political discussion. Please show respect to participants, our speaker, and the moderator of today's program. Raise your hand by clicking on the reactions button in the lower part of your screen, and we'll try to get to everybody with your questions and answers in the upcoming period. So we're going to have a lot of questions. So let's start with Sharon. If you would please unmute yourself, and we're going to do one question at a time, Amit, so that we can get a little more interactivity. And we also want to encourage people who, several others of you have visited China recently, and you're welcome to, as Amit has said, bring up your experiences and your thoughts about some of the questions that Amit raised in his presentation. So, Sharon, if you would please go ahead. Sharon, if you have to unmute. Whoop. There you go. You should be able to now.
Thank you.
Sharon.
Thank you,
Okay.
Amit, especially for all the hard data that you shared. That's really important. I visited China 15 years ago, and my question has to do with the declining population. So I visited some professors of political economy at Tsinghua University in Beijing. People say Tsinghua is the MIT of China, but it's actually the other way around. And they told me that their models and analysis said that by the end of this century, the population of China will be 750 million. And I said, I gasped when they said that. I said, you mean 50%? They said yes. And maybe the fact that the one-child policy is no longer will slow that decline in population, but it's not going to stop it. And in fact, I've spoken to a number of professional women in China, Chinese women, who have shared with me that they regret that the one-child policy has been dropped because they were perfectly happy with having one child only. But the point is that they're building infrastructure, of course, social infrastructure as well as physical infrastructure for 1.4 billion people, but they're not going to need it that much in the future. So that produces many questions, and one of which is the role of AI in production. So whereas under capitalism, AI will be a complete disaster for the working class, but it will increase unemployment a lot. And it will be a disaster for the capitalists if they don't do something about mitigating those effects. But in a country led by the communists, it could be extremely valuable, especially if the population is declining. And so I was
Two
wondering
minutes
about what you
best.
think about all that. Thank you.
No, so
But
wonderful observation. Yeah, so wonderful observation, first of all, Sharon. So thank you for putting that. So indeed, one of the anxieties that people have in China is with regard to the elderly population. So the elderly population is increasing, and there is no one to support them. In fact, some of my colleagues who are very young, in their mid-30s, they have their own children right now, and they are finding it very difficult to have more than one child because of the rise in healthcare and rise in different necessities of life. So, but it has to be. I think it has to be seen in terms of how Chinese economy itself is doing, and how the living standard in China is rising, but at the same time, the cost of education, health, and other necessities that is also rising. So what it is doing is that nowadays, if you are not well educated, probably if you're not university graduate, then you will find yourself doing like 3,000 yuan kind of a job. If you want to go and earn like 8,000, 7,000 yuan per month, then you have to earn a PhD kind of a degree, or at least a BTech graduate or something like that. And by the time you do that, you are past your prime. You can't reproduce at 35 years or 36 years of age. So that is one of the reasons throughout the world we are seeing a decline in the fertility rate, not only in China but elsewhere as well, where educated people are trying to get jobs. For uneducated people, I mean, there are jobs, but they are largely jobs on the subsistence level. But if you want to go higher up in the income scale, you have to get good education. And by the time you do that, you are not able to reproduce. So, of course, Chinese one state, one child policy was also responsible, but it has to be also seen in the perspective of the demand of the Chinese state for educated skill force, and which actually delays the marriageable age, delays the childbearing age, etc. And that is one of the results. And then, of course, you're absolutely right that Chinese population will decline, and there is a very positive correlation between demographical growth and the GDP growth. So the GDP growth is declining. One of the reasons definitely is less number of Chinese workforce that we will see in future. Now their productivity is increasing, but the point is that, as you rightly said, that 750 million population will be there by the end of the century, which means it will not be having 8%, 9% of the GDP growth that it used to have 20 years ago. So yeah, I mean, what can we do about it? Now, to your second question, AI, definitely, I mean, AI is laying off a lot of people everywhere, and it is definitely a concern. So that's why we need, a socialist revolution. But I mean, so all your points are valid.
Okay, next is Citizen One, followed by Gene. So, Citizen One, you are unmuted. So, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Amit. Very interesting presentation. With regard to the no kids or not having more than one or two kids, especially for university educated women or couples, that sounds a whole lot like South Korea and Japan, and certainly to a certain extent in the US, as well as other so-called advanced Western economies. I just want to say, with regard to your issue about censorship and bookstores, I have a Chinese-born, longtime female friend of mine, and I never bring up politics with her as I don't do and for friends from other societies that might have high censorship. And if she ever happens to bring up some aspect of American or Chinese politics with me, especially American politics, even before Trump, she once heavily criticized American street protesters, saying that they should immediately and unquestionably obey the police. And if I give her a different perspective, she quickly backs off and says, yeah, but I never watch the news. I never follow politics at all. And I just let it go. But I always thought it was somewhat wryly humorous that she would then claim, I don't watch TV news. I don't read newspapers. I don't listen to the radio. And but anyway, I just want to let you know about that. So I would like to ask you, when is the U.S. going to war against China, if you believe that? Thank you.
Well, let's try to keep it focused on but you can comment, but go ahead. Let's try to keep it focused on the topic today, but go ahead, Amit, if you want to comment.
These are all relevant comments. So I completely agree with Chinese state censorship on doing politics. So the politics is such a like a bad word in China. So you cannot speak. You can talk about politics against the US. For example, if you want, if the Chinese colleagues are quite comfortable talking about US aggression and the aggression by foreign countries, but when it comes to their own society, they don't want to talk about it. The reason I mean, I understand why it is so, but even the words like class struggle, you cannot speak the words like class struggle in China. So that is quite remarkable. I mean, so a society which proclaims itself to be a socialist, why does it have to ban even words like, cultural revolution, class struggle? Why is that? So I think, I mean, it's a deeper question. I mean, why people are doing like that in the state, why the state is doing like that. The second question, why, when China is going to have war with the US, I
Or
don't.
actually, the U.S. go to war against China.
Yes, yes, yes. So, most likely, see, I mean, my reading is that Chinese military is not yet powerful enough, and the US also knows that because US has a lot of economic interest in China. So I didn't show you the data. Let me just show you this particular piece of data, which is quite interesting. I'll just take like 1 minute because this is exactly the point which I was trying to make earlier. Uh, so, uh, so I'll just do that. So, okay. So, so this is a data that,
You have to share your screen. Share your screen.
okay, yeah, let me just share. Sorry. So sorry for that.
Mm-hmm. Take your time.
Yeah, so this is a data which is a very good question. I mean, why, when the US is not going to attack China. So let me just show you this data, because it is not profitable for the US to attack China. So okay, okay, so this is, yeah, so this is a table which is basically showing to us that top exporting firms from China. So in China, as I said earlier, that only 8 to 10% export is happening by state-owned firms, state-owned enterprises. More than 90% export is due to the foreign enterprises and the public and the private-owned enterprises. Now look at this data. So the top, the 10 firms, top 10 exporting firms from China, who are owning those firms? Taiwan, okay? And Taiwan is also like a code word for the US capital, isn't it? I mean, US and Taiwan capital are highly integrated. So in that sense, and moreover, Chinese technology is still heavily dependent upon the US technology. So which is quite significant over here also. So if you look at China's top three manufactured exports, office and telecom equipment, chemicals and clothing and textiles, look at the Chinese share of world export. It is like 33%, 36%, quite large. And yet the profit share of the Chinese companies is only 5 to 8%. So although a lot of export is happening from China, but the profit share of China is only 5% to 8%. Whereas US makes a lot of profit from the export happening from China. Okay, so it's like 60% of the profit which is happening from China is made by the US companies in office and telecom equipment. In clothing and textile, also 22% profit goes to US companies. Okay, so and we have some other data also. So if you look at all the national profit share compiled by, so these are different industries, and what the data is showing to us is that US corporations still have the number one position in all of these industries. This is the data of 2024 2025 actually. So or between 2019 and 2021. So 81% of the whole profit share in the world is owned by the US companies in aerospace and defense. France comes second. So, these are some key sectors in which US makes a lot of profit, and a lot of these profits are made from Chinese-based companies. Okay. So, what it basically tells us that US is getting too much profit from China. So why will it attack China? Rather, it will try to integrate China into its global hegemonic system. So, for example, the financial sector of China has not been integrated yet. So, what the US is going to do about that? And I think that will be the next step. Rather than going to the war, I think the US is putting a lot of pressure on Chinese financial markets to get integrated so that US can start making more profit out of financial products of China.
Okay,
Many
next
Americans
is,
love to say
no, I
we're
think
going to
we
attack
actually
China.
need to
That's why
go
I asked.
on. Go ahead. Thank you. Next is Jean, followed by Janet. So Jean, please go ahead.
Okay, and I'm unmuted. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks so much, Amit. This was a great talk, and I really think it's important. I thank the planning committee, my comrades on the planning committee for putting this on our discussion because a lot is happening, and there's a lot of hostility, and we need to get past that. But one of the points that was made was, I guess, what is China? How do we conceptualize China? And I thought it'd be worthwhile to say, look at what the Chinese themselves say about their country. And this is from the Constitution of the People's Republic of China. Article 1 states, the People's Republic of China is a socialist state governed by a people's democratic dictatorship that is led by the working class and based on an alliance of workers and peasants. And they continue to say it is, in essence, the dictatorship of the proletariat. And that's pretty hardcore Marxist Leninist. I thought I was hardcore, but I mean, they put me to shame, I think. So I just wanted to let people know that, but also get your comments on China as a socialist state governed by a dictatorship. They also say that China can't achieve its goals without the support of the whole world, and this support has been very, very important to them in the past, in spite of what the United States is currently doing. So again, thank you.
Okay, so do you want me to say
If
something
you want to
on?
make if you want to make a comment, please go ahead. Otherwise, we can go on. It's up to you.
Okay. Yeah, so look, I mean, of course, the Chinese state says that Chinese people, what they think about the state is not very clear. So Chinese state has been saying that this is socialism with Chinese characteristics, or some other words, some other phrases. But the point is that what do actual peasants in China say? I mean, are they allowed to even enter to the city? See, Chinese model is built upon migration of rural workers to the cities, and her whole cities have been built by them. But then they have this cuckoo system, which is called the registration system. What they do is that they give only living and working permit for certain time, let's say 1 year or 2 years, for that workers to stay in China. And if they think that that worker cannot be absorbed in the urban market of China, then they are basically sent back to the villages. So the question is that, I mean, what the peasants are saying about China. Chinese land is still state control, but they are increasingly becoming commodified by leasing process to several even foreign owning firms. And a lot of debt, mortgage, etc., actually is based on the current large selling of land to different firms. So, what people are saying is different from what the state is saying. This is what I would say.
Okay, next is Janet, followed by Ray. So Janet, please go ahead and unmute. Thank you.
Thanks,
You're
Alan.
on mute.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Amit. My question is about China's social credit system. I understand China is a cashless society and uses a social credit system that requires everything to be purchased online or with apps that collect data on the purchaser. It's set up to control what people can purchase. For example, the amount of gas or electric charging for one's car is limited based on one's carbon footprint. And depending on that, some people may not even be able to purchase any gas or charging for their car, or use public transportation, or purchase a seat on an airplane, and thus may not be able to travel anywhere at all. I believe the social credit system is controlled, owned by the state, whereas in the US, it's they're trying to implement it, but it's through the private sector. So, would you talk about this, your experience with paying for things on your trip, and whether India uses a social credit system? Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Janet. I mean, that's a good question, actually. Yeah, so you're right that the cash is disappearing from the payment system in China, and more people are relying upon apps and those kinds of debit cards, etc. But apps primarily. However, I mean, cash is still there. It's not like that it has completely gone. And in fact, in many tourist places, people accept large amount of cash. So that is there. Even if you buy clothes and if you have cash, you can buy things. But you're right, the app-based payment system is increasing. Now, I'm not very sure whether this phenomena is there in the rural areas also. We definitely saw in the urban areas this phenomena has picked up. But we did not, I mean, I haven't gone to the villages, so I cannot speak more about that how prevalent it is in China as a whole. In India, on the other hand, you have a very centralized kind of a, unified payment system, which is directly linked to the phone number. And in India, I think in India, the transactions are happening more through that kind of a system than I saw in China. So in India, people are relying more upon these kinds of apps because the state has created a unified payment interface through which people are paying, as they are, buying things in the market. And that is public actually. So that has not been commodified. However, we are not very sure how long it will remain public. At what time it will become private, that is quite to the state. People will give some challenge and resistance, but ultimately the data that the state is collecting in both India and China, and even in the US, will become commodified when the crisis period will come, when there are debts going to be paid off. These are the times when things become commodified. So I don't know the extent to which the Chinese people are relying upon the social credit system that you are talking about. Definitely, it is there in the urban areas. I'm not so sure about the villages, but you're right, it is increasing. But the states, I think, throughout the world are collecting data through these apps. And when they will become commodified, it's only a question of time. Until unless we give resistance and we put up plans, this can easily become privatized.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Ray, followed by Raj. So Ray, if you would unmute, please.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I enjoyed the presentation. My comment, and I welcome your response to this, is any analysis of the Chinese life today, economy, politics, has to take into account the policies of the government that were undertaken decades ago. One of which was that they will reduce poverty in large scale. And so they were able to implement in the past 30 years a series of policies that reduced poverty, increased the upward mobility of about 800 million or so Chinese. And the second is the issue of sovereignty. Chinese have been very sensitive about this. They have said this over and over in all aspects of their policy, as well as in history. That is, they want to maintain sovereignty. They do not want to interfere with other countries' businesses. And so these two tenets, in a sense, have driven what we see today as China. Again, from someone who's been there a couple of times in the past 10 years or so. And so I think both of these have been reflected in the 5-year economic policies that have been put out by the government. in the many decades since 1949 revolution. And so if you look at the most recent economic plan, the 15th economic plan, there is actually quite explicit planning for upgrading the traditional industries and fostering what's referred to as emerging sectors, boosting scientific technological self-reliance, and actually driving consumption and domestic demand in order to support the domestic economy. And so I think these are the things that we need to consider when we are looking at China.
Yeah, so thank you, Ray. I mean, so they are very important questions. So I agree on the sovereignty part. I definitely agree that among all the third world countries, or you can say developing countries or oppressed countries, China is the only one which has been able to exert so much sovereignty vis-a-vis imperialist countries. So definitely, I mean, in fact, one can go to 2001 when Chinese entry to WTO was allowed, and it was on Chinese terms that US actually yielded. So China secured a lot of good economic deals during that time, which was basically saying that, okay, finance will not be, free market. Everything else can be, but finance will be state protected all the time. So these are some of the sovereign decisions that they took, which helped them to have more investment. But the point is also has to be made is that any economic sovereignty has to be coupled with the economic model that the country is pursuing. Now, if you look at China, its entire growth model is based upon export-oriented economy. It is trying to increase the consumption level of its society, but it's still hovering around, only 35, 36% of 40%. Whereas, the housing consumption in other third world countries, let's say I'm talking about India and Brazil, it is up to 60%. So housing consumption as a percentage of GDP is definitely, a lagging component in China, which says that it is relying mostly upon the export of its commodities to the world, and under the protection of the US global hegemony. So the point which I'm trying to make is that it is the US which has gotten a lot of benefit from the Chinese manufacturing and Chinese working class. So a lot of surplus has been transferred from China to the US and Europe and Japan, etc., and Taiwan. So the point is that if that is the model, then how much sovereign is the country? That has to be the question that we need to ask. Is it really sovereign? If its manufacturing, etc., is totally based upon what is happening to the imperialist countries or even to the other Southeast Asian countries. About the poverty, I think you are right. I mean, China has been able to take a lot of people out of poverty, but so has been the situation in South Korea, so has been the situation in Southeast Asia, even in India, even in Brazil. So what is special about China in taking people out of poverty? This debate I have never gotten into, because poverty as a whole has been declining throughout the world, absolute poverty. Whereas the income inequality, which basically defines the relative poverty. So what we should be actually talking about is relative poverty. And the relative poverty has increased in China. So top 1% in China is also making a lot of money, whereas the bottom 40% is not making, is living in penury. So the point is that when we talk about poverty, absolute poverty has been reduced or declining throughout the world, not only in China, but the relative poverty has increased throughout the world, including in China.
Okay, next is Peter, followed by Richard Wright. So Peter, please unmute.
Okay. That was a fabulous answer, I have to say, because you actually said what I was going to say, and that what I was going to say was fabulous. So what you said was even more fabulous.
Should we move on to the next question?
No, just
go
kidding.
ahead.
Just kidding.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
It really does take a Marxist perspective to answer these kind of liberal critiques of people that question the Chinese Chinese line. And one of those, of course, is the amount of poverty. There's still hundreds of millions of people living in poverty in China. Certainly, I think 800 million lifted out of poverty, but certainly in all the rest of the world, under capitalism, hundreds of millions were lifted out of poverty. This is what capital does. It increases the extraction of surplus value and the wealth in a society. But what I want to talk about was another interesting way of looking at the economy, and maybe uh, maybe this could be discussed. I I think that's it was mentioned that when looking at the GDP growth over the last 20 years, it certainly was growing at 8, 9, 10% for quite a number of years. And then over the last 10 years, it's slowly been declining to the point where it's approaching a standard capitalist nation, and that is 4%, 5%. And that's what we have today in China. And this was interpreted as a decline, which of course it is not. It is a decline in the growth, not a decline in the economy. The economy is still increasing and growing. And it reminds me of the comparison to the United States, which has a lower GDP growth. And people in this past year, of course, it was somewhere around 2.7%, if I'm not mistaken, which people describe as a catastrophe. But we have to stop and step back from looking at GDP from a capitalist perspective and instead look at it from what is it really measuring? It's measuring the growth in production of value in the economy. But what happened under Biden administration, where we had somewhere on, we're not entirely sure of the numbers, but somewhere between 10 and 20 million people come into the country, vastly increased the working class and the percentage of people working. Yet, over the last year, there's been zero growth in the working class. In other words, all immigration has stopped. So when you look at a growth in the GDP, you have to look at, is the population growing? In China, the population is declining. So a 4% growth in GDP is actually, it could be flat, it could be zero. And the actual PPP, the per person parity of GDP could still be increasing. So I'm interested in your view of looking at economic growth from the perspective of the size, from the real population growth, and how capital has a different perspective on GDP than Marxist might have.
Yeah, so that is a lot of thought in packed in some phrases. So let me try to unpack some of it. So yeah, I mean, so yeah, of course, I mean GDP is not a very relevant term in Marxist economy. I mean the because of several reasons. However, I mean. So GDP per capita, if you just talk about it, then GDP per capita in China right now has gone to around 15,000 or 13,000 US dollars, uh, uh, something like that, according to, I think, yeah. So that just shows that China is already on the verge of getting clubbed into middle income countries, something similar to what we see in Turkey, or even in it has surpassed Brazil development, definitely. It has gone beyond Brazil, beyond many of the Latin American countries. And that is one of the reasons that and so there is all this talk nowadays that is it going to be trapped in the group of these middle income countries that is hovering around 15,000, $20,000 GDP per capita. So this is middle income trap that people are talking about. So Chinese GDP currently is growing at 4%, 5%, but if it declines further, or let's say if because of the several debt that its financial market of China is really highly inefficient. It is plugging entire country down actually. So, and it needs several reforms because the capital, the capital growth of capital accumulation, the capital development accumulation needs freedom for the finance, which Chinese system is not allowing, especially the stock market, the bond markets, they are not highly developed. So, so because of that, I mean, people are right now, a lot of people are claiming that it might get trapped into this middle income, and it may not grow even further from that, which happened to Latin American countries. So Latin American countries pushed that $15,000, per capita limit 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and they're not growing after that. So is the same thing going to happen in China? So that is the question. But as the previous question brilliantly basically said this answer, that Chinese development is more sovereign and it has more rooms to maneuver. And my thinking is that it may not make, I mean, most likely it will not remain in the middle income trap. If Chinese economy keeps growing and the difference in the GDP per capita between China and the US keeps reducing, then we will really see US empire and US hegemony in great danger. But for that, it will take a lot of time. Perhaps we are talking about another 20, 30 years. But yeah, I mean, I will leave it at that.
Okay, we're going to run over just a bit here, so we'll try to get everybody in. Next is Richard Wright, followed by Raj. So Richard, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I gotta say, I took umbrage with a lot of your statistics and such. I think I expressed some of that in the chat. But my first off, I wanted to get back to Sharon asked a question, I think, about the one China policy. And I think that's very much a myth that's been perpetrated here in the United States. According to my now ghosted girlfriend, who is Chinese, brought up in Beijing. Her father was a Marxist scholar. That in fact that was just limited to relatively the seaboards, the eastern seaboards. That when you get into the interior, that the various ethnic groups, I believe there's something like 150, 160 different ethnic groups, that the one China policy did not apply to them. It was very much on an ethnic regional basis. And they have been examining the nature of that as well. Secondly, as far as labor power goes, in particular, I think the Chinese just made a deal with the Russians as far as allowing Russian farmers to come into Upper Mongolia to help out their farming situation. Anyways, yeah, I'll just leave it there because we're running over time. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, next up is Gulden. I'm sorry, Raj and then Gulden. So Raj, please go ahead.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask you, thank you, Amit, for staying up so late in India, and thank you for your presentation. A lot of information to digest. Now, in the question where Sharon was saying that they are projected to have only 750 million people by the end of the century, Chinese population, and they will depend more and more on robotics for people to live. And so two questions on that. I mean, how profit, if you're a Marxist, comes from people's work, living people's work, the surplus. So that's, unless you are stealing from other parts of the world, which is imperialism. That's the imperialist mechanism by which you pull out profit from other countries. So China will have to be, in order to have standard living rising, and declining population would have to be imperialist, even if it's not now. And the second thing is, what kind of society is it? I mean, you were saying it's because of education people are not having children. My view is that they're not having children because women cannot handle the stress of work and raising child. Just like in India, men probably don't do much help around the house, although it's changing in India for the next generation. Your comments on those 2 points. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for asking this question again. See, my sense is that this 750 million population is a figure uh, arrived through some modeling exercise. Now, that modeling exercise is subject to many assumptions, which may no longer be valid after 5 years, 10 years, 15 years of time. So we are seeing that from the current projection, if the birth rate and the death rate in Chinese society remains the so and so, then probably by the end of the century, this is the figure. But that figure is subject to change, first of all. So, and any state at such a level that we keep talking about, and especially Chinese state where things move very fast, I think once they decide that their population is declining and they need to do something about it, they will do something about it. So that is one thing. The second thing is that you're right that the woman, okay, so I didn't touch upon the condition of Chinese women. Definitely, I found more Chinese women in the labor market, in the education sector than we find in South Asian countries. So women are more liberated over there. But the point is that when it comes to the choices of getting kids or not getting kids, the patriarchy still works even in the Chinese society. In the some form of feudalism is still there in the sense of preference for son and not wanting girl child, etc. So you're right that women find it very hard to raise kids on their own, and that may be one of the reasons. So I mean, see, these are some of my observations. I haven't gone deep into that. What are the exact reasons of the demographic decline in China? And so probably we need to think more about it. And if you can share some more papers or data, then that would be more illuminating.
Okay, next is Gulden, followed by Bonnie. So Gulden, please go ahead.
Thank you, Amit, for the presentation. Very informative. We were in China starting September, October, November last, about 2 months. We visited about 7, 8 different cities and small towns. I agree with you that technological and infrastructural development is really impressive in China. As far as the Chairman Mao, there's a museum that I visited in Shanghai about Chinese Communist Party history and Japanese and Opium Wars. It was very impressive, very informative, and they even had a short movie about that shows the Communist Party meetings, how they met, and what were the discussions were, and that kind of information. People we spoke in China usually said that Mao is a historical leader and the father of the country. So my impression is Mao usually stayed in the books as far as the new generation goes, I guess. But generally, China is controlled but well-managed country. Because as far as the air pollution, protecting natural resources, environmental cleanliness, traffic, etc., they make decisions on behalf of the general public rather than the corporations. We found out that people usually complain about the government. At the same time, they trust their government because when we talk about corruption in the West, corruption, theft, homelessness, racial divisions, high prices, etc. They usually said that, oh, government won't allow such things over here. So they trust their government usually. Yeah, that's my impression. We learned that working for the government means going away from your family about 3-4 years to the rural areas and teach farming, producing, marketing, etc. to the rural, to the people in the areas. I'm sorry. 2 minutes, I'm sorry. So my question is about the hospital charges that $40 that they charge. Is it for the foreigners or citizens as well? Because we learned that health insurance is really inexpensive in China. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Gol. I agree with you that some people trust the government, but again, I would say it is subjective because when I talk to my student friends and colleagues and scholars friends, they trusted the government, but at the same time, they didn't trust the government. So it's a dialectical relationship with government, you know. So with regard to your comment that what was the charge in the hospital? No, $40 was the out-of-pocket charge paid by Chinese citizens because they didn't have the money to pay for their health care, actually. They didn't have health insurance also. So although the health insurance is quite extensive, but it also depends upon whether you are employed right now or not employed and other factors. So for foreigners, it is even much expensive. But even I'm talking about for Chinese citizens, just a CT scan cost us $40. So that is significant actually. Yeah, but yeah, with your comment on the trust in government, I'd say yes, there are people who trust the government a lot. But again, you will find many people who are not so happy with the government.
Okay, next is Bonnie, followed by Judith.
Okay,
So
can you
Bonnie,
hear
please
me?
go ahead. Yes, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Amit, for your presentation. I would like to point out that China is the only country in the entire world where the workers employed by Amazon are unionized. Whereas in our country, it's very difficult to maintain unions, maintain membership in unions. Our government and is always on the side of the corporations and against unions, and so is the media. And secondly, China is running away. I don't know if that's the right term, is just amazingly creating sun power through what do you call them?
Solar.
Solar. Thank you, solar energy,
Yeah.
and just making it very cheap. So while we pay a huge amount of our for our electricity. Thank you. That's all.
That's absolutely right. Amazon employees are unionized, but they are unionized, as somebody has commented that they are unionized in New York also. And even in India, the gig workers are getting unionized who are Amazon employees. So this is not only limited to China.
No, they're not unionized in New York. There's one warehouse where the workers have unionized or tried to and got beaten back.
No,
So
I
it's
agree with
not
you.
yet, not yet unionized.
I presented the unionization data. So I said that roughly 40% Chinese workers are unionized, which is huge. In comparison, only 10% workers in the US are unionized. In India, it's even 6 to 7% because the Indian workforce is also very large. But such a large workforce in China, which is like 600 to 700 million workers, and 40% of them are unionized. So that means, I mean, that some socialist remnants are still there. But the question that we need to ask is that whether those socialist remnants are declining or whether they are getting strengthened. Okay. and how much, I mean, in which direction Chinese society or the state is going. Is it getting more capitalistic and probably more imperialist down the line, or is it going to become more communist down the line? So that is the question I think is more important question. And I think the answer to that regard is that China is getting more and more capitalist. And if you think about the transfer of surplus value as one component of imperialism, then China is getting more imperialist also, especially after 2015. The outward direct investment of China has gone $3 trillion, which is roughly half of the US FDI, which is roughly like $5 to $6 trillion. US is investing to outside countries. China is investing right now $3 trillion. So China is getting near to the US in terms of export of capital. But on the military side and on the side of historical violence and historical slavery, imperialism, etc., definitely, I mean, Chinese imperialism is we cannot even talk about Chinese imperialism. So I'm saying that if you think in terms of transfer of surplus value, etc., China is getting more and more capitalist. Whether the workers are getting unionized and the consciousness remains on the trade union consciousness level, that is one thing. But for the Leninist party, the state power, capturing the state power and making planned economy, that is the way forward, which China is not doing.
Okay, next is Judith. And Judith, if you would keep your question short, one question, because we're over time now. Please go ahead, Judith. Unmute. You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. I am interested in the aspect of whether China is becoming an imperialist country, but I'll put that aside. I'd like to ask you in capitalist America and Europe, sex is used to sell goods and to control as a social control method. What is the status of sex in China? Is it and sex and in relationship to marriage and other arrangements? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm afraid I'm not very well versed on that, but definitely Chinese women condition is much better than in other third world countries that I have visited. I mean, especially I'm talking about my experiences in South Asian countries. So Chinese women are definitely more liberated. The public space is much safer. I mean, if you walk in Chinese cities, people keep walking in the night. Although the night life I did not find much in China. People wake up early in the morning around 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and they start working right after, around 7 o'clock. So I didn't find much nightlife, but workplace and the public space is definitely much more safer than we have elsewhere. And at the same time, as it is reflected in the declining birth rate, it looks like Chinese women have more control over their body. So from that perspective, that socialist state idea that the women should be educated, women should be given more freedom over their control of body and control of the workplace increase. I mean, this is definitely true in China vis-a-vis other third world countries. But
could I clarify something? Do they use sex to sell goods? And does the entertainment industry glamorize the female body like they do in America?
Yeah, so South Korea, I mean, they're heavily influenced by South Korean culture, especially the youth. And so the female body is definitely sexualized. And there's a lot of discussion on Chinese internet. And the body shaming is also there. So those things are there. I mean, all the consumer. So see, I mean, I talked about commodity fetishism and consumerist culture, which is there in China, everywhere actually. So those kinds of things are there.
Okay, very, very last question. Very quickly, Citizen One, please. Your last question. It's almost 2 a.m. in
Okay,
Mumbai.
no, this will be really brief. I mean, the reason I asked you that question is because as I posted in my chat, in case you saw it, every year American leftists, especially prominent American leftists, keep predicting this year or before the end of next year, the U.S. will go to war against China. And this is something, with all due respect to those leftists, I always found preposterous. So I don't know if you're aware of that or not, but that keeps happening, like a religious prediction.
Yeah, I
agree.
think he's actually commented on that already. So,
Yeah.
okay, so want to thank you. I mean, it was a really great presentation, good combination of your travel experiences and statistics. I want to thank everybody for your participation in the question and answer. Great questions, good answers. Check our website for our future programs. Sign up at icssmarks.org and make a donation to support our work. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and let's stop the recording. And thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.